Yamandu Marang, Suzanne Ingram, Yawanyadi. Hello, my name is Suzanne Ingram. I wanted to have a mention, I mentioned this earlier in the presentation I did today. I'm only just learning those particular words. It's not as though I didn't grow up with some Wiradjuri words growing up, but my senior countryman, Uncle Stan Grant, has been doing a lot of work, as many of you will probably know. And for me, it's a really good way to be able to honour the work that he's done as a Wiradjuri man. So I do it a little bit clumsily, but it brings me kind of a bit of joy to be able to do it. I wanted to talk to you. So look, everybody's been talking very much about their specific things. I'm going to go macro. I'm going to be talking on a larger kind of scale. My work is in health research, and I'm very interested lately, most particularly in how economics and global economics particularly has impacted on Aboriginal people's health. And that will probably come up as I talk a little bit further. First of all, may I please also acknowledge everybody in the room and also my other country women and men who I do see here in the room as well. Right, so my question is, who is the human in human services? What we're doing here is constantly what we are doing is working with the state. The state has a particular assumption, working under the state has a particular assumption, which is the empirical claim that each person is better off under the state than outside of it. Indigenous peoples throughout the world and throughout history have given the lie to this. However, this is what economics and global economics and microeconomics is actually based on, is this belief that if you're not within the state, if you're not under the state, if you don't come under that, then you actually become what is the state of nature. And there are a lot of assumptions that are attached to what the state of nature is, which will come up a little bit later. Okay. So in order to enforce this state as opposed to the state of nature, what the state does is argues under contractual arrangements. So pretty much everything that we've been talking about in this entire conference, in particular what I just heard, is everything about these contracts. This is a contractual arrangement, and how we actually make this work is the point of tension quite constantly, because we are working with a power. We are in a settler colonial nation, and we can't lose sight of that fact because they won't let us. Contractarianism is the basis for this negotiation with the state. Contractarianism is defined by Whittequist and McCall as theories justifying government sovereignty with a contract device involving a comparison between the state and the state of nature. So we already have, what we're talking about is these setup of these two worldviews. The other way of looking at that is, inasmuch as sovereignty is absent, and I'm quoting somebody here, inasmuch as sovereignty is absent, to that extent, men will begin to exhibit behaviour typical of the state of nature. Now, if we come back to what is happening in Australia at the moment, this is the constant battle that we do have. We see the Recognise campaign. We see a lot of the resistances from our mob articulating that. This is around what sovereignty actually means at that kind of macro level. And where we are is that we are in that space of negotiating that as a contract, because we haven't lost our vision of ourselves as sovereign people. What that actually means then is how that plays out. In amongst that then also becomes a lot of assumptions. So as I just said, in as much as sovereignty is absent, so if we are working with a state that believes that we have lost our sovereignty, we don't have sovereignty, then assumptions fall into that. So you become, instead of an Aboriginal person, you become an abstracted Aboriginal person of whatever the state is imagining you to be. The Aboriginal Housing Office is a very interesting example, and it was great listening to Tom Slockey earlier today, because he clearly still has those same drives. When I was listening to him today, those same drives that established what his vision was with the AHO in those early days. This is the relevant legislation that the AHO has to operate under. This is the state. Previous to this, what my grandmother had to live under, what my mother had to live under, was state-enforced adherences such as the Aboriginal Welfare Act. There's a number of acts that were directly placed upon Aboriginal people. We have now moved into a position where we're now dealing with a whole host of other things, but there's a lot of different layers and buffers. And essentially that's what organisations such as the AHO is, such as the organisations that we are working through with Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. Let me know if you're still following me, because sometimes I can confuse myself, because I'm really just learning this and I find it very interesting for my own work. Under a lot of those models, though, Aboriginal people are reduced to managerialism as opposed to self-determination. And we see these constant tensions that we keep talking about amongst ourselves in the community. We have not lost our ways. We have not lost our moral codes. We still practice those. We still remember them. But it is under these relevant legislations and under the state-driven controls that we are constantly struggling with. And there's always resistances. So I gave a talk earlier today where we discussed the census, and for those of you that weren't there, between 2011 and 2016 census, there has been an increase of 100,000 people. We've risen from 2.5% of the population to 2.8% of the population, and 40,000 of those people have ticked the box for the first time. That is not a birth rate. These are people who are self-identifying. So within, and that's a non-relational identifier. There is literally just ticking a box. This is not going out and speaking with another Wiradjuri person or another Bundjalung person around who your kinship networks are. We know this, but under the state doesn't recognise this. So we have our resistances. This is on the Greater Sydney Tenancy Service. And Shane, you would know this. Part of the legislation that the AHO has to deal with and buffer through is exactly this confirmation of Aboriginality in order to meet all those obligations that the state has placed on us. This one, and it seems to be, or can seem to the uninitiated person, that this is just a simple thing. You basically just, walk up, you walk into a land council and they'll welcome you with open arms. This I found really interesting because they're saying confirmation of Aboriginality can be a long process. Don't think you're just going to walk up like that. I don't believe, though, that anybody who was raised in a state-based situation would really understand that, because this is not about who we are as Aboriginal persons, this is about who they are as they're gaining an identity. Because the reason why this is important is because what's important to Aboriginal people. This is the data set from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare 2017. And it was an analysis of what is important, rated by tenants as importance and meeting the needs of the household by housing program type. If you have a look there, SOMIH refers to Aboriginal tenants. The far and away one is family and friends. Yet what we see constantly, and what I'm seeing in the data that I see all the time as well, and also with facts, meetings that we're having with housing, is the priority is repairs and maintenance. It's all about the bricks and mortar. Now, the bricks and mortar is very important, but so is this. And we're seeing that being played out right now as we see, in the Redfern-Waterloo transfer. That's also happening in Claymore. There's all these processes now in place. What we need to take notice of, though, is under the state, we are living within an economic global situation, and this land is absolutely valuable. So insofar as the personhood of an Aboriginal person, or as that person contains their sovereignty, when that comes up against something like a global economic drive, we've got tensions. So this is where the work that, and I commend Shane and his team, because this is all the work to try and work with the Aboriginal community organisations, as well as working with non-Aboriginal workers throughout the government spaces around trying to bring everyone into alignment. This is not, I don't think, an easy task, and it's ongoing, and there's constant pressures. I want to just make a note of a couple of cautions. What we do have with a lot of these as well is a lot of, these are around interpretations, and one of the ones which is coming very popularly at the moment is the human rights, what I call the human rights doxa. The human rights on the surface of it is said to be a wonderful thing. Each person has human rights. Really, the only right is the right to have a human right. Human rights is actually an international liberalist legal structure, and Robin Quiggin, who's the former acting Australian Human Rights Commission Social Justice Commissioner, would be aware of this. It is a legal structure. There are definitely rights, but we are still working with the state to argue for those. What my argument is that we are, as Aboriginal people, as a Wiradjuri person, as I said, as a Bundjalung person, as a Wilwan, we have our own innate rights. We have who we are as we recognise each other. If I can just make this a little bit of a quote, and it's from a writer that I have a great deal of respect for. The human becomes a person through the relationships, the statuses, the roles and etiquettes that his or her culture requires. For quite a lot of people, the social world of the mainstream is not appealing. Participation in it entails a violation of their being as an Aboriginal person. They desire more autonomy, not better incorporation. So, to conclude, a couple of things that I did here today, and particularly in the partnership meeting with Tom Slocky and the team that he's been working with, Argyle, I heard the words commitment and care. This is the sense that I see is starting to come through. We are, as Aboriginal people, we believe ourselves to be about caring and sharing, and that is our mantra. That is who we are. What does that actually mean? And we need to define that for ourselves, not through the state. I believe the banner for the Aboriginal Housing Office's vision is to ensure that every Aboriginal person in New South Wales has equal access to and choice in affordable housing. How we actually go about doing that will entail a lot of these kinds of tensions. That's pretty much about it, really. I hope I've made sense, and yeah, thank you very much for your time.